Next up is George Quezada. George is an innovation scientist with CSIRO and their Data 61 project. His work includes undertaking research on digital disruption and technological innovation. George is very much concerned with what will happen in the future. Today, he will share with us his framework for making sense of innovation and change in the construction industry. Thank you, George.
Hello. Okay, so I'm going to bring something a little bit different to the day. Has been a good day? Good sessions? So hopefully you've heard a lot about digital throughout the day, and we just saw a great BIM presentation. Part of what we're doing at Data 61 is really looking at the digital technologies that are coming online and are emerging and will be prominent in the future, and trying to understand what it means for industries, for governments, for business models, for communities and markets. And I'm in a unit in Data 61 that does a lot of scenario planning with governments and industry in particular. And what we were doing with the construction industry recently, based in Queensland, was looking at the future of construction and trying to think through the implications for jobs and skills. And we worked with a great partner, Construction Skills Queensland, and we came up with some scenarios. And I want to share those scenarios with you, but not in any detail. I kind of want to talk big picture and start a conversation that we might continue in the panel discussion afterwards. And I kind of want to just get to the point of my talk, and then I'll show you a bunch of slides and pretty pictures. But the gist of it goes like this. If we go down this path of digitalizing and having a single source of truth for construction work, maybe workers using augmented reality visors to take some of that information and bring it to the site to inform their work in real time. If we go down that path and we go far enough, we start to take humans out of the equation, because what digital does, or what all this data does, is create, say, a playground for AI, artificial intelligence. So you put all this data, you put some sophisticated algorithms together, and maybe add some pretty smart robotics, and all of a sudden you start to do more work that humans were doing, but you do it with machines. So we were kind of asking this question: what would happen if machines started to do more and more and substitute more and more for human labor? The other question we were asking was, where would jobs be located? So the thing about the global economy and an economy that's becoming digitalized is that capital goes anywhere. It doesn't really care about place, doesn't care about Brisbane, doesn't care about Australia. It just cares about where it's going to get the most return, right? So you guys are in business, or you've got shares. You don't necessarily care where value is created. You just care that there is a return, and it's going to be significant. So the question we were asking was, to what extent would jobs in that future construction landscape be located locally in Australia, in Brisbane? To what extent would we have an industry for people? So big questions, I know, and do I have a clicker? Where's my clicker? Okay, so this is a rundown of the scenarios that we came up with. There's 4 scenarios, and there are two drivers that are shaping these scenarios. The first one is on the horizontal plane there, and that's task automation. That's what I was talking about. On your left is limited task automation. This is that world where people are still doing the same jobs. They're just better informed with data, and they're using digital technologies like BIM to make decisions and improve the productivity and safety of projects as well. On the other side, we've got substantial automation, and this is where we see machines substituting for people. On that vertical plane is innovation culture. So this is answering that question of to what extent will jobs and work for people be done locally in this case it was in Queensland, but you can substitute Queensland for Australia. So on the bottom there, cautious innovation culture. This is where we prefer to be followers, perhaps early followers, but certainly not doing a lot of R&D and so that early stage innovation. At the top there is bold. This is where we take measures, and I'll go through a couple of ideas later in the talk, but we take some significant measures to ensure that we're attracting investment in R&D, and we're doing a whole bunch of things around materials, around construction process, neat applications maybe built off BIM models, all sorts of things like that. So for the rest of my talk, I'm just going to focus on the scenarios 3 and 4 there. So on the substantial end of the automation axis. And I'll just make a quick point here that part of the thinking that we do with scenarios and a lot of the work that I do is working with trend data and creating megatrends. And looking at that information and trying to understand how that could show up in some kind of catalytic event or pressure that might change the industry. So we might think about how flooding in Brisbane changed laws around land use and around where you could build and the sorts of building techniques that would be appropriate for this environment. Think about the way the global financial crisis in the property sector made it possible for developers and builders to experiment with small lots and buildings that would for residential sector that would fit onto smaller lots. So things like that. So the way to think about the future. This is just a simple little graphic that just illustrates how when we think forward, we realize that we live in a complex environment, it's complex economy, industry, and we can be certain about very few things. We can only be really certain about the present time, so that's why we use a cone to illustrate this kind of separation, this expanding of uncertainty. And what we're doing with scenarios is we're helping to stretch people's imagination and their thinking into the future and imagine more than one possible scenario. So often we have a gut feeling about how the future's going to show up. Scenarios are about helping you get past your gut feeling and entertain other possibilities. So I mentioned trends and megatrends. These are some of the trends that we looked at in our analysis of the future of construction. Hopefully there's no surprises there. I won't go through all of them in detail. So this just emphasizes the point that I was making. So this is a really key concept that we discuss in our report. So the way to understand the impact of trends and megatrends on an industry is to use a model that's hopefully useful, like this one. This model tells a very simple story. There's 3 levels. There's the level at the top there that describes what sort of trends and megatrends are important for the industry. There's the middle section, which relates to the business models, the market preferences, the rules and regulations, the policy settings, the innovation and R&D that happens in an industry. And then the bottom section there is the niche innovation layer. And that deals with all the new stuff, all the new business models and innovation that occurs at the margins of an industry. And it may even occur outside of the industry, and it's not seen as anything to be taken seriously or seen as useful. And the way this works is that pressure at the landscape level builds up and causes some problems at the regime layer. And then those problems create a window of opportunity for new ideas, new thinking to bubble up from the niche layer. So this is the way we explored the scenarios using this kind of thinking. I'll just skip through this. So just going back to those questions that I asked, when we think about digitalization of the industry and moving down potentially a high automation future and a future that's going to require a lot of investment in innovation, how is Australia positioned? So here's some data that relates to our digital infrastructure and our innovation performance. And without going into the details, what you're seeing is a series of numbers that relate to rankings, global rankings. So the higher the number, the worse that you're doing. If this was a rugby scoreboard, it wouldn't be too bad, but it isn't. And what you should be able to see very, very quickly is that on a range of benchmarks that really underpin the innovation performance of any country, where we're not doing too well. So the significance of this is that we more than most of our peer economies, do face some serious challenges when it comes to transforming our industries and creating opportunities, future opportunities in terms of jobs and economic opportunity for our kids and grandkids. So let's have a think about who those new entrants into construction might be down the track. So with these scenarios, we were looking out 20 years, but the idea is that when you set yourself the task of looking out 20 years and trying to imagine the future, you'll probably only get out to 10 years in actual practice. So we could see some entrants from manufacturing giants like Toyota, and Toyota already has a housing division that services the Japanese market. An interesting backdrop to this story is that there's a lot of speculation, a lot of analysis about the future of the auto industry in light of autonomous vehicles that says that the total fleet might actually decrease globally. And so car makers may look at the prospect of seeing lower volume sales. So companies like Toyota, if they're thinking about this, and they will be because they think very far out into the future, like most Japanese firms, they'll be thinking about pivoting, using their manufacturing capability and strengths and moving into other markets. And you can't discount tech giants, the companies that are now the biggest companies in the world, and you know these are household names. What you might not know is that there are Chinese counterparts that are almost as big as these companies. And they're going to be hungry for growth in the future. And they're going to look for new markets. And we've seen the way Amazon pivots into market after market. And it just seems like there's no boundaries in terms of what industries they're willing to move into and disrupt. And there's also emerging tech giants like Tesla. And the way I think about Tesla is, they're all about stationary energy for the auto sector. But at some point, they may just say, you know what, we're doing all this technology that's trying to bring about a clean energy revolution. But the construction industry or the housing industry It's just building substandard products that are energy guzzling, and we should go in and disrupt that market. That's an entirely plausible scenario, and I know that I was at Prefab Oz the other week where the Tesla speaker got up and kind of made that reference. There's also new startups in the construction space. This is one based out of Tennessee, and exploring with the exciting new technology that enables 3D printing of free-form structures. So they want to enter into the housing construction market and basically give people new design options that were previously unimaginable. So this house that you can see an artist's impression of at the bottom there is actually being constructed this year. And this is a house that's already been 3D printed in Russia, and this is a company based out of North America. This is a Dutch company that's working with 3D printing of steel structures. And what they want to do is essentially transform the way we do bridges, but also other steel structures that we see around cities, in and around buildings. So this structure is being built right now. It's for a canal in Amsterdam. And they're working with Autodesk using their generative design application. And this is another angle of this is actually the construction of the bridge in progress. It's about a third built. And you can see it uses a robotic arm that kind of travels with the bridge as it's being built out. And you can see from that cross-section of the structure, that this cross-section here, that there's a lot of material efficiency that's possible with this type of technique. So it's a very slow process, but one that's showing a lot of promise in terms of material efficiency, but also when you think down the track, maybe in 5-10 years' time, the speed of construction through this method will massively accelerate. Think of this as the early mobile phones of the 80s and 90s, really clunky, brick-like technology, but give it time and it'll refine into something very exciting. The other thing that is really important to consider with startups, and especially in the tech space, is something that this whole lean innovation, lean launchpad movement, new business movement has brought is really a renaissance in business model design. And right now, there's a 10-volume book series being written on business model innovation. And this is just a snapshot of some of the thinking that's coming out of that movement. And so they don't think just about technology, and they don't and markets and business models. Sorry, they don't just think about technology. They think about the business models and how that can disrupt the value proposition and their entry into new markets. So, how is Australia going to compete in this landscape? How are we going to maintain and attract investment and new jobs? So I've suggested 3 things to consider. The first one, and I'm saying these are the things that we have to do, or these are the right things. These are things that I'm working with at the moment with some other work in CSIRO. The first one is to focus on the velocity of innovation. So this is not an unusual message. This is something that's coming very much out of the lean innovation and business startup communities. But the distinction that I'm making with this graph, with this picture, is that there's a way of innovating that seeks to protect and lock up intellectual property. So on this side, we've got organisations that are doing a lot of R&D in-house, and they're protecting their IP and they're commercialising it to the extent that they've got financial and human capital to devote to it. And as you move across this axis, you start to encounter new organisational designs and new collaboration models that break down those sort of organisational boundaries and move towards a more open innovation ecosystem. There's been a lot of research done on the advantages of companies that operate in open innovation ecosystems compared to those that don't. I won't go into this in any detail. It's a whole other conference in itself. But fair to say is that the jury's out. Those companies that participate in more open innovation ecosystems are outperforming those that don't. And this is just one case study. There's among many. Between Lucent Technologies and Cisco. Cisco came out of nowhere, whereas Lucent was dominant in the ICT space. And it's no coincidence that it's around the early 2000s that we start to see, in this example, a crossover between the two, with Cisco really taking off and dominating, and Lucent declining before it was eventually bought out. The second thing, consider pooling R&D and investment in innovation. So the thing about the digital age and globalization is that we've got these tech giants that basically outspend any Australian corporation by an order of magnitude. So the question is, how can we compete with that kind of investment, that kind of financial clout? And when it comes to investment in AI, the vast majority of that is happening in North America and parts of Asia and Europe. So how do we start to play in that space and start to present a credible, pose a credible, I suppose, position in that environment? I would suggest that Australian companies start to think about pooling their resources, perhaps participating in a federated firm, and sharing the investment load. Here's a provocative statement by Elon Musk about AI and its importance to business going forward. The third thing to consider is creating safe spaces for innovation. So this is something that we're working on within CSIRO for the built environment. So we're looking at 2 sites. I'll share one of those in a minute. But just this idea that if we're going to build, new precincts, redevelopments in existing cities or potentially new cities, we're building satellite cities right now that are from the ground up. If we're going to do all this new building and infill work, we may as well start apportioning a small percentage of those projects into innovation zones, spaces that are managed differently from a planning and development process point of view. They have different development standards. Potentially, we can start to consider regulatory holidays for these areas, which sounds like madness, but when you're in a globalized, hyper-competitive digital economy, this is not a crazy idea. This is going to become very, very important. So the first one that we're working on is in Western Sydney, and it's with a private developer, Celestino, and it's a new science park near the second airport site, and it'll house about 10,000 people. It's mixed use, so it'll have a lot of employment landed there as well. So the idea is that most people that live there will probably work there. A little bit like a large campus, that the sort of thing that you might see in Silicon Valley. So this is the sort of thing that I think we really need to start thinking very carefully about. And that's my time done.